Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. We are joined for a great show ahead with Ben Jacobs, transfer expert and journalist. Ben, welcome to the show. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, even though it's the international break. And hey, behind me, I've even bought a tactics board in case we have to get back into that Ruben Amorim system.
Exactly. You know, you're here to break it all down for us, and we've got so much to talk about. I think the first thing that's the news that everybody's talking about this morning is the potential investment into Manchester United. And if you're not caught up on that yet, there was a tweet by Turki Al-Sheikh, and it was this: the best news I heard today is that Manchester United is now in an advanced stage of completing a deal to sell to a new investor. I hope he's better than their previous owner, so a little bit of opinion on the end of that. But he's claimed that there's an advanced stage here of completing a deal to a new investor. I wanted to ask you, Ben, because you do so well on these topics. What is your understanding of this?
So the first thing to say is that Turki Al-Sheikh is one of the most connected individuals in sport within Saudi Arabia, and he chairs the General Entertainment Authority. He runs Riyadh Season. If Manchester United come over for a friendly, then Turki Al-Sheikh will be across that. And he is well connected within investment circles, and yet sometimes he plays games and some things he publishes are to be taken with a pinch of salt. For example, he put a photo up of Mo Salah in an Al Hilal shirt, and about 2 weeks later, he extended at Liverpool. But Turki Al-Sheikh is well respected. Now, my understanding is a few things on this. The first is, if there is a mystery investor, it is not from Saudi Arabia. So we shouldn't connect the fact that just because Turki Al-Sheikh posted this, it automatically means that any prospective investor comes from Saudi Arabia. It doesn't, as far as I'm aware. Second thing, people will leap to Qatar and Sheikh Jassim or anybody affiliated to him. And again, there's denials from the Qatar side as well. The bigger picture, is there an investor at all? Well, Manchester United sources are in the dark and they deny that anything is advanced or close. But could there be a possibility that the Glazers are independently speaking to investors? I think maybe, simply because we know that their long-term game plan is to try and get this minimum 5 billion valuation. And you would think with the new stadium, that number would go significantly higher if they are to go. And the other reason why the Glazers can hold conversations independent of the football club, whether they're formal or informal, is because a deal came into place after 18 months following Jim Ratcliffe coming in as a minority investor, basically still allowing the Glazers to sell and forcing Sir Jim Ratcliffe to go with the Glazers, or, as far as I'm aware, Ratcliffe being able to match any prospective offer. So as soon as Ratcliffe came in, all parties knew that after 18 months, a clause would come to the fore allowing the Glazers to still potentially sell. But there's nothing advanced. There's no name I have at the moment. So I think we have to take this news with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but not so much salt that we simply dismiss it, because Turki Al-Sheikh is very well connected in the Middle East. But again, I'm told if there is a mystery investor, it's not from Saudi Arabia and it's not from Qatar.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of people did assume that it would be from Saudi because of Turki Al-Sheikh's connections to that side of things. When you speak there about the Glazers and Sir Jim Ratcliffe and their sort of partnership, would it be the Glazers that are out there that are sounding out potential investments? Do you think it's them that are most likely to want to sell their share of Manchester United?
Yeah, Jim Ratcliffe is obviously committed. You don't speak one day about give Ruben Amorim 3 years and then 24 hours later start exiting the football club. But again, there's a special clause which is known as a drag-along clause, and that allows, within takeover terms or business transactions, the Glazers, after 18 months, to effectively, should they wish, put the club on the market, whether formally or informally. And if they get an acceptable offer, they can, in inverted commas, not literally drag along, or maybe more accurately, drag out Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But again, I'm told within that term, if a scenario happened where the Glazers got an offer and said, we want to go 100% of the club, everyone goes with us, including the minority investor, Ratcliffe would have the opportunity to then say, I want to match that offer, and then obviously buy 100% of the club. The other reason we have to be careful with this clause is because it would only really be feasible and it would only really be practical if a prospective investor wanted 100% of the club and only 100% of the club, which you may remember was the perspective of Sheikh Jassim. Because in theory, somebody could go to the Glazers and say, we only want your shares, and then they could have a conversation. And obviously Jim Ratcliffe would presumably say, if that happens and you do that transaction, I still want sporting control. But of course, would somebody taking not 100% of the club, but a majority or all of the Glazers shares be happy with the current dynamic? And that's what makes this clause far more complicated than just saying it's there and it's active at the 18-month point. It became valid in mid-August, because naturally you've got this side deal between Ratcliffe and the Glazers about sporting control, which complicates any Glazers exit as long as Sir Jim Ratcliffe is there. So the clause is valid and relevant if someone says, I want 100% of the club, and because the Glazers have got the majority, they say, we want to take that, and then that investor says, but I want 100%, and then Jim Ratcliffe is forced along his way or potentially forced to match it. But outside of that clause, if the Glazers wanted to sell 10% to somebody, then they could have their own conversation, keeping Sir Jim Ratcliffe in the loop. And again, Turki Al-Sheikh did not say new owner, did not say majority owner, he said new investor. So if a mystery investor becomes a reality, and we'll have to wait and see, we have to understand whether this is somebody buying a small amount of Manchester United or a large amount of Manchester United or all of Manchester United. And once we get that truer picture, should anything advance, then it will be a lot easier to get a read on the situation. But right now, it was a surprise Turki Al-Sheikh announcement. Manchester United sources are in the dark, but it's not entirely impossible that the Glazers might be holding these conversations, because we do know they've got a long-term exit plan. It's just about making sure if they do exit the club 100%, they do so with their valuation hit. And you would think the point when that happens is probably when this new stadium gets off the ground from paper to a reality, because then the club's more modern and obviously the overall value of the business grows.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I would have thought if it was completely false that maybe there would have been something put out there to shut it down, but I suppose the Glazers are probably always open to offers or investments being put forward, so that would kind of contradict if they did do that. But on a potential new investor, Ben, I wanted to ask if a potential new investor could accelerate the plans for the new stadium or infrastructure projects that Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have been discussing. Is that something that could accelerate them plans? Is that something that they'd want to go outside of the club and get investments into to get that new stadium off the ground?
Yeah, we'd have to know what kind of investor. For example, when Arctos came into PSG, they bought a minority stake, but they're spearheading plans to either buy the Parc des Princes or potentially move away from it and find a new stadium, because they believe that's how they get their return on investment. But in terms of the football side, they're relatively silent as far as day-to-day decision-making is concerned. So somebody coming in would naturally have to coexist potentially with Jim Ratcliffe and the Glazers if they just bought a small stake, or if the Glazers exited, they'd become the majority owner or the 100% owner, depending on how a deal is done. And each of these complicates in terms of what we're predicting. So I think it's a little bit speculative to start saying if a new owner comes in, they could do this or that, because we don't know whether or not these advanced talks, at this stage anyway, are legit. All of us are digging around at the moment. But again, it's not a Saudi investor. And remember, if it was a Saudi investor to take a significant role in Manchester United, you've already got PIF, who are the controlling owner at Newcastle United. If it's a Qatari investor, regardless of who it is. Nasser Al Khalifi and Qatar Sports Investments would know about it, and sources close to those entities and individuals don't. And there's firm denials from Qatar and specifically from the Sheikh Jassim camp that they've got anything to do with something that may be advancing between Qatari investment and Manchester United. And the other thing is that Sheikh Jassim always wanted 100% of the football club. So with this drag-along clause, in theory, that's possible, but they never met the Glazers' valuation. So what really will have changed in 18 months? You could even argue the valuation of Manchester United as a football club has gone down in the last 18 months because of where they are on the field. But some would say in the industry the overall brand value has increased, the enterprise value, as it's known, of the football club, simply because they've got these new stadium plans and the regeneration of Old Trafford off the ground. But I think it's a really difficult question to answer, and I'm doing so honestly because sometimes as a journalist we feel inclined to say we've got to move it on, we've got to give you all the bits of information, so you leave thinking they're going to do this and they're going to do that. But as long as this investor is mystery and may not even be there at all, it becomes really difficult to actually start to judge whether there's a timeline for any new investment into Manchester United and what that potential investor might look like. But once again, we have some things we can rule out. Not a Saudi investor, not a Qatari investor, but I don't think we can discount what Turki Al-Sheikh has published entirely because he's extremely well connected in Middle East sport, and I would call him one of the top 3 most influential figures in sport within Saudi Arabia.
I mean, I think it's really good to have the clarity, Ben. And I know some people might be there thinking, oh, well, it's not going to happen. I thought there was going to be investment and now there's not because you give us such good clarity on that. But you can only say what is the truth and what is to your knowledge. And we know how good you are on these sort of topics. So you've heard it from Ben. No current investment from the Qatari side or the Saudi side. But it doesn't mean there might not be in the future. For now, it is that there is nothing there. But I want to move on a little bit to the current owners, specifically Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Ben. He spoke out and said that he wanted to back Amorim for the 3 years that he's at Manchester United for. Even if the Glazers, thought about potentially moving him on or sacking him, he would explain that he's here for 3 years and you've got to see the best out of him in 3 years. To your knowledge, is that the feeling inside Manchester United, or do you still think a poor run of results could change that?
Yeah, I think at a club like Manchester United, a poor run of results can change anything. And to look 3 years ahead instead of 3 games ahead is very risky. And my understanding of the situation is the same, that 1, Manchester United want to make it work with Ruben Amorim, but 2, results can't continue in this way. And I know Jim Ratcliffe kind of attacked the media a little bit, saying that some journalists just want a light switch turned on or put a story out on a whim that adds pressure to a manager, and then the next day it's the opposite. But absolutely within Manchester United, there were senior sources underlying the importance of that Sunderland game. And you can't go from needing to win that game, not necessarily definitively to keep his job at that point, but possibly. So there's pressure. You don't go from there to the next run of 4 or 5 games and it suddenly be all calm, because beating Sunderland, as needed as it was, doesn't change the landscape, the start to the season, but it's one positive. And the task for Ruben Amorim remains not planning over 3 years, not being patient, not building a project. The sole task for Ruben Amorim, I'm told still, is getting some kind of European football this season. So if they get to the festive period and it's not looking likely, he'll still be in trouble. If they get to the end of the season and it doesn't happen, he'll still be in trouble. And then Jim Ratcliffe's 3 years is going to look very bold and very, I think, uncertain, because I don't think any owner at any top football club in the world can guarantee a manager a blanket 3 years. Enzo Maresca won 2 trophies at Chelsea and qualified for the Champions League, and Chelsea are reviewing him at the end of year 2. Maurizio Pochettino was reviewed at the end of year 1. Manchester United reviewed Eric Ten Hag and kept him and got rid of him just a few games later, bringing in Ruben Amorim. And that was under the Glazers. So you have to look at the context of Ratcliffe arriving and how they dealt with Ashworth in and out, dealt with Ten Hag in and out. And these long-term plans are idealistic. And I'm sure that's what Ratcliffe wants. But then there is the cold, hard reality of this is Manchester United. So whether or not Ruben Amorim is game by game, we'll have to wait and see. But as a journalist, I'm happy to quote Jim Ratcliffe because he's on record. But I also put scrutiny on his words. And my feeling remains that Ruben Amorim is going to have to turn things around between now and the end of the year, or he'll continue to be under pressure, rather than this notion that just because Ratcliffe has said he's got 3 years, that suddenly means now that his job is safe. Yeah,
I think with Sir Jim as well, because he's previously said comments that have sparked a lot of attention in the media. For example, Manchester United would have been broke by Christmas if he hadn't have come in and changed things. And, you know, that wasn't exactly always the case. Like, certain comments can be said in the moment and then you look back at them and it's like, are them words going to carry out? Are they going to carry through? And with Ruben Amorim, if he lost every game from now until the end of the season, I doubt he's going to give him that 3rd year. He's all in context. I think, like you said, he absolutely wants Amorim to probably turn it around, win every game, and him to be here for 3 years. But what happens on the pitch, that's yet to come, and we'll have to wait and see. I do think, like you said, it would be silly right now if the Manchester United manager wasn't under some sort of pressure because we're Manchester United. So let's see how Amorim does. But it's good to get clarity on that, because I think some people did think no matter what happens, he's still going to be here next year. Because if you just read in Sir Jim Ratcliffe's word for word, that is actually how it comes across. But
yeah, and I think they want to be patient. Like I say, they want it to work. They want a few results to alleviate the pressure, and then they can say we're doing okay. And suddenly 3-4 results on the bounce, or 5 wins on the bounce, that guy can finally get his hair cut. And you go, that's enough proof, that's enough of a run, that then if it's a bit up, a bit down, of course you give him the end of the season, because if you win 5 or 6 on the bounce, you're going to be in the European picture. But what happens if you lose 4 or 5 on the bounce? And that's when I think the hierarchy would have a very big decision to make. And it's all very well Jim Ratcliffe saying the Glazers would never tell him to sack Ruben Amorim because they're across the pond and it's collaborative, but naturally everybody will input. And I think what makes it, in my opinion, very difficult to look beyond the late November period is just the run of fixtures, because they're difficult. And in many ways, before we hit the really busy festive period, they're quite season defining. So you beat Sunderland, mood's a bit better. Amorim's still there, of course. And then if you go away at Anfield and you beat Liverpool, everyone's thinking we've got a bit of momentum. And then you've got a home game against Brighton. But what if Liverpool respond to losing to Chelsea in the last minute by putting 5 past Man United, and then Brighton, who have done okay on the road, they've won at Stamford Bridge, come to Old Trafford, there's pressure. Then you go away at Nottingham Forest and you've got 2 managers suddenly under pressure in Ange Postecoglou and Ruben Amorim, and then away at Tottenham isn't easy either. So I think these fixtures are going to show us what Manchester United are made of, and it's really important, not just specifically for Amorim and potentially his future, regardless of Ratcliffe's comments, but the players, the fans, the mood, the season, everything. Can they now build up to Liverpool and go and get a result that maybe some don't expect them to be able to pull off? And if they can, it's back-to-back wins, you've beaten the Premier League champions, and suddenly it feels like the season is in full gear.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that happens. I really hope that happens. We'd love to see it, but it is a really defining moment for Ruben Amorim, these fixtures coming up. I have to agree with you, just because of what's on the line and the type of competition you're coming up against. I mean, just on that, I know we've touched about it on previous shows, but I just want a recent update on that, because sometimes things can flip when there's a win, when there's a loss. Dressing room still behind Amorim as a whole?
Yeah, I think I've said on previous shows that I'm not aware of any real issues between players and managers. In a personal sense, there are a few professional discussions which sometimes can be healthy. It's clear that a player like Bruno Fernandes, in captaining Manchester United, is driving a lot of unity, and actually, as far as I'm aware, gets on very well with Ruben Amorim. And yet, does he prefer playing deeper or in a more advanced role, it's obviously the latter. A few of the new signings are still feeling like they need to gel, and some of that is down to the injuries, and Benjamin Sesko acclimatising. So Cunha came in, he played as a 9, then he got injured. Now Sesko's starting as a 9. Cunha was on the bench, I think, for the last game. So there's quite a lot of stop-start. Brian Mbeumo hasn't really got going, but the mood has been lifted by that win over Sunderland. And I think in the first half in particular, Manchester United were excellent. Don't underestimate the Mason Mount goal and what that can do for a player where his confidence can be quite shot. He reads a lot. And if I think back to his Chelsea days as well, he can get a bit down by the mood. But when he's streaky and confident, and when he takes a chance and scores a goal like he did, that could really open the floodgates. And it wouldn't at all surprise me, knowing that Ruben Amorim really likes Mason Mount, if he now gets a run in the side and starts to get a regular streak of goal contributions. And I know from training, a lot of the players have been watching Mason Mount and have been really impressed. So now he has to find that consistency within matches. And then at the other end of the field, I think many at the football club, as they've seen in training week in, week out over the last few weeks, are just really impressed by the maturity and the confidence and the authority of Sene Lammens. And it's no disrespect or criticism to Altay Bayındır, but Lammens has come in, he kept a clean sheet on his debut, he made a couple of important saves, and he's just got a little bit of an air of authority about him. He's vocal, he's liked already by his teammates. And we said on the very first show when he signed that my understanding is he's brought in as a number 1, but it was always a case that there'd be 3 or 4 weeks of acclimatization before he got his first game. Now he's got his first game. My expectation is that he starts at Anfield and beyond, gets a run in the side, and if he can start keeping a few clean sheets, but also just doing the basics right and giving that backline confidence, then again, hopefully Manchester United can get going. So, of course, the mood in the dressing room is positive. It was never negative, but it was all just a bit stop-start. Players coming in, players coming out, players being used out of position, players being used in more than one position. So now I think Ruben Amorim will be hoping for a settled starting 11. And if he can get that, coupled with a couple of big wins, then, as I said in my last answer, maybe Manchester United can finally get going.
Maybe he will get his 3 years if he does that. We'll have to see. I mean, talking about players in the dressing room, you touched on Bruno Fernandes. I do want to talk about him because there's some news come out around him. We will do that. I can see some super chats coming in as well. Ryan T says, we need to sell players. Rebuilds takes time. CA says, what if this investor's a Saudi major athlete or somebody else? He's just hit billionaire status, and the quote says he too. Kind of referencing Ronaldo there. I mean, Ronaldo has said he wants to own a football club at some point in time, but I very much doubt right now it is Manchester United, unless, Ben, you have something to tell us.
You never know. Actually, I'm in Portugal at the moment, and I was in a panel about an hour ago with Diego Dallo, and he is a investor on behalf of a kind of fund called Apex, and he was asked on stage, would you ever consider buying a club, even Manchester United? And he said after his playing days, he'll learn how to invest and where to invest, but he definitely has an appetite to do something in football. He's part of the investment portfolio that do Baller League, and he's also an individual investor in some sort of nutritional supplements for athletes. And Ronaldo was at the event where I was last night as well, and his life after football plan is not really clear at this stage. But what is interesting is, as part of his new Al Nassr deal, he's kind of got equity, which allows him to have a formal say within the recruitment. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see Ronaldo invest in a football club, but I don't think there's anything to suggest that he's the secret investor behind Manchester United, although if he was, that would be the story of the century. It would
be absolute cat out of the bag moment, and we'd have to reference back to that super chat. It would be a grand reveal. But I wanted to now ask, just before I touch on the Bruno news, I just wanted, if you have any, Ben, a little bit of background on Manchester United's new appointment, Director of Football Operations at Old Trafford, Amish Manek from Brentford. He was the Chief Operating Officer at Brentford. Is there any background on him and why Manchester United have brought him in?
Yeah, so Manchester United are to appoint the Brentford Chief Operating Officer Amish Manek, and it's believed that his title, as you say, will be Director of Football Operations. And although not started yet, the memos went out at both clubs, his former employer Brentford and Manchester United, to say that he'll be joining. And the remit is effectively to run business specifically at Carrington, where all of the daily football operations come from. So this is not about recruitment, but it's sometimes about all the things that can help you get a player and all the things that keep your players happy, because the football operations director at clubs tends to deal with security, fan engagement, standard of facilities. So as Carrington continues to modernise, Manek will have a big say there. And obviously the thing about Brentford and their training facility is it leans so heavily on data and connectivity to make sure that players are not only training well and feeling like the facilities benefit them, but they're maybe wearing monitors, or there's cameras around, or they can watch 360-degree replays of training, or set pieces can be visualized. And Brentford have got all manner of secret data rooms in and around their facility. So he'll have a lot of ideas that he's learned from Brentford to really connect the data. And there is a lack of data at the moment compared to other big clubs at Carrington. I think that's part of why Manek has been brought in. And then you have all the other things such as staff management, non-playing staff that are there at Carrington, the broader infrastructure, travel. So it's about making the player experience and the Carrington culture both modern and seamless. And this, I think, is why they want to bring somebody in that's done that at a club that relies heavily on data and does have a very modern training ground. This appointment, I'm told, has been driven specifically by Omar Barada, and Manek will join the leadership team. He will report directly into Jason of a recruitment role, but I don't think that he'll have any say in terms of who they sign. But as I say, when they're pitching to a player and showing them Carrington, or what the security's like, or who the staff are, or how they'll get around, or where they'll live, or what ride share maybe they'll join, all these things your director of football operations can help with and be very valuable. And then I think there'll be a lot of FaceTime with Mark Armstrong as well, because Carrington isn't only about training and giving the players a bubble, it's also about modernisation, it's about age groups connecting, it's about maybe bringing in some other business, some showpiece games, some visiting sides that are training there, working with grassroots football, and all of that is on the brand side, and that's when Mark Armstrong will come in as well. So it's a very broad role. He is part of the leadership team, but it's an operational rather than a recruitment remit as far as I'm aware.
Well, I wanted to quickly ask you actually on that. There was reports coming out about potential mid-season friendlies for Manchester United over in Saudi, potential, teams coming over to Old Trafford. Is that something that's on the cards as well?
Yes, the mid-season friendly is specifically being explored for Saudi Arabia at the moment. And guess who the person responsible for a mid-season friendly in Saudi Arabia is? Turki Al-Sheikh. So there's a little connection there.
Tell you what, Ben, you might know something we all don't.
But Manchester United are prepared to look at all options. So this isn't Saudi or nothing. And I think that's the difference. The Saudi side have three possibilities. One is they do what Sir Alex Ferguson did in 2008, and they do a more private warm weather training that's paid for. They spend a week there and they play one game, likely in Riyadh and likely against Cristiano Ronaldo's Al Nassr. Two is that they play a Saudi 11, which is what Mark Armstrong did with PSG, and Ronaldo would probably, if not definitely, be part of that. And that would be a fly-in, fly-out, no warm weather training, 3 days, short trip. And the third option is they replace last season's foreign entrant Inter Miami as the international club in the so-called Riyadh Season Cup. And this is a 3-team tournament, the two Riyadh clubs, Al Hilal and Al Nassr, plus a visiting team. And when it was Inter Miami, it was all about having Messi play Ronaldo, but then they were both injured. Now it would be about Ronaldo playing Manchester United. And instead of one game, you play 2 games. And if you top the group after those 2 games, you get a trophy and some prize money. So if a mid-season friendly takes place in Saudi, it's give or take 5 million a game. So 5 million if you make a short trip, plus your travel and your training facilities paid for, and maybe some commercial money due to activations on top. If you play in the Riyadh Season Cup, you can get 2 lots of 5 million, maybe some prize money. You're there for a bit longer, maybe some sponsorship money. So that's in excess of 10 million. And therefore you're earning more in a week than they will have done in a 3-week tour of a place like Asia in recent memory. So that's the appeal. The challenge with Saudi is you've got Ramadan in mid-February, March. You've got the festive fixtures in early January where Man United can't travel. And then the other windows are between mid-November and early December, when Saudi Pro League clubs have a small break, but Man United have got 4 fixtures in a short space of time. Or you push it to mid or late January, which is when PSG played their Saudi 11, and then the Saudi Pro League clubs have got a lot of fixtures, but it might still be possible. So if they can agree on a date, this could happen. But if they can't, Manchester United are not against going somewhere else in the world. And they're also not against bringing somebody to Manchester who maybe wants to pay to come over and play a friendly at Manchester United Stadium on their own doorstep. But of course, when you do that, it's a lot harder to get the same return on investment because there's costs affiliated to hosting. Man United would never pay somebody to play them. So any team coming over to Manchester would have to find a way of making commercial revenue by being in Manchester. And it's very difficult for Manchester United to make the same kind of money. So Saudi would be a win-win for Manchester United and for Saudi if they can agree on a date, and it would be the most lucrative. But I am told it's not the only region in the world where Manchester United are considering travelling to.
We'll have to wait and see on that one. I mean, it's a lot of money to make. It is a lot of money to go out there and make, and other options might not be as lucrative as you say, but something that Manchester United could do with money, especially when you're looking towards transfers. And with that, I wanted to bring in Bruno Fernandes. So it's an interesting one, Ben, and we've spoken about on the show previously about the possibility of Saudi coming back in for Bruno next summer. They've been there for the last 3 years. So it came out earlier from the BBC Simon Stone that Bruno Fernandes is fully committed to United for this season and would only consider a move to a European club if he did leave. But then yesterday, there's reports coming out which felt like was maybe from Manchester United's side, that Manchester United would accept a £60 million bid for Bruno Fernandes if somebody did come in for him next summer. So I wanted to ask you, is Saudi off for Bruno? Do you think it still could be there? What is the clarity around Bruno Fernandes' future? Still be at United? What's your take on this?
Yeah, the first thing to say is the notion of a mid-season move has never been on the cards. So January isn't even worth thinking about. Bruno Fernandes told Saudi Arabia last summer that he was committed minimum to staying one more season at Manchester United and playing the World Cup. And then he'll assess. And obviously, if Man United are doing well, Bruno Fernandes may say, I don't want to go anywhere. So the notion January clubs could come in, never the case. The idea something is agreed with Saudi Arabia, never the case. But Bruno Fernandes remains a leading target for Saudi Arabia, and Saudi dealmakers don't care whether players say we're not going to go, we're not interested at the moment, because they always back themselves to change the mind of players. Sadio Mane said no 3 times and joined. Bobby Firmino said no twice and joined. Bernardo Silva said he was never going to go, and now along with Benfica is considering it for next summer. You have guys like Ivan Toney and Darwin Nunez that definitively told them no chance, never going. In 2023 and 2024, they're both playing there now. So Saudi dealmakers will not be too worried about any target if at any point before they want to bid, and there's a long way to go before next summer, there are indications that maybe Saudi is not on that player's radar. And Bruno Fernandes, as far as I'm aware, was quite open to Saudi Arabia last summer. It just wasn't the right timing because of the World Cup. and it wasn't the right decision for his family, and he remained committed to Manchester United. So we'll have to wait and see what next summer brings. I'm not aware yet of a specific Saudi club for next summer, because as I've reported consistently, it was Al Hilal for a bit, then it was Al Nassr, then it was Al Ittihad. I think of those three, Al Ittihad are probably the ones to watch, simply because even though they're different players to Bruno Fernandes, N'Golo Kante and Fabinho are both expected to leave, and therefore Al Ittihad are going to be looking for some kind of midfielder, even an attacking midfielder, to fill that void. And they're defending Saudi champions, and they will want a marquee name. So Saudi deal makers will not give up on a player like Bruno Fernandes in the same way they've not given up on Mo Salah, they've not given up on Harry Kane, who's given them zero encouragement for 2 years. And this is why it's really difficult to rule out Saudi when they can just keep upping the offer and upping the ante. But right now, what we can say about Bruno Fernandes is that he's not in formal communication with Saudi again. There's no offer for next summer yet. And from Manchester United's point of view, that 60 million asking price is accurate to my understanding, because it won't be 100 million now, because another year has passed since Saudi deal makers were prepared to pay up to 100 million. So flash forward to 12 months, and the Saudis know they're not going to have to pay 100 million for Bruno Fernandes, and European clubs would obviously not go to that number either. So the price will be there. And from Manchester United's perspective, it probably doesn't matter whether it's Saudi or a European club, because ultimately, if they're going to sell him, they'll want that kind of ballpark or valuation. Otherwise, they might see it as more valuable just to keep their captain. So we'll kind of have to just watch this one very closely, because whether or not it's intimated that Bruno Fernandes has ruled out Saudi suddenly, or whether or not there are European clubs chasing Bruno Fernandes, Saudi will be ignoring all of that noise. And in likelihood, as with Bernardo Silva, as potentially with Harry Kane, and as with a few younger players as well, they'll likely still be putting their best cards on the table. They'll likely still be engaging and making offers, because that's how Saudi work. They don't listen to a no and go, okay, see you later. They listen to a no and they go, let's up the offer. Let's ask why it's a no. Let's see whether we can turn the no to a yes. With Riyad Mahrez, it was a no because his family wanted to live in Dubai. So they went, fine, we'll get you a Dubai visa. With Jordan Henderson, it was a no because the training facilities were not good enough. So they built him a new gym. With Sadio Mane, it was a no because the wage wasn't high enough. So they tripled it overnight. With Karim Benzema, it was a no because the schools weren't good enough. So they built a new school 3 miles, not specifically for Benzema, but when sport meets another government sector, they can escalate projects and they can get real estate or schools or projects done very quickly. So suddenly what wasn't there when Benzema was first pitched it was there a year later when he joined. And this is why it's very difficult to say Saudi is off the table, because things can change very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of commitment from Saudi, and you've got to respect it. If you want something, go after it fully. And so I think everyone who maybe, was thinking Bruno Fernandes to Saudi was completely off next summer, I wouldn't say it's absolutely on based on what you've just said, but it is something that they will probably try again for. And I think it's open. I think the main thing to take away from the Bruno Fernandes thing is that for this season, which I think is what he's trying to make clear, maybe beyond that, but for this season he's 100% committed to Manchester United and wants to do the best possible for Manchester United, which that's just what his personality is like. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I mean, people saying get someone to want you the way Saudi do. I mean, yeah, that would be nice. But let's move on. I mean, you spoke about Saudi's interest in Harry Kane. I want to bring Harry Kane back up, Ben. I want to bring Harry Kane back up. And the reason being is because, again, yesterday, reports were flying around about Harry Kane's €65 million release clause to be activated in January for the summer. We spoke about this on our last show, and you said, I can't quote you verbatim because I can't remember the exact words, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you did say it's something to keep an eye on and we can come back to it, something along them lines. What's the current situation, and is there any possibility at all that Manchester United could be in for Kane, or he would even want to come? Because I know Manchester United is a very prestigious club. It's an honour to wear the shirt, and I'm with all that. But Bayern Munich unbeaten, scoring goals left and right in Champions League. What is the situation there?
Yeah, I think what I said at the time was that we need to keep an eye on the Kane situation, but don't get too excited about it just yet. Kane says repeatedly in public that he's only thinking about Bayern Munich, and that's fine. You would expect that. But as you allude to, the release clause, which existed this year, diminishes in January to 65 million euros, which will be seen as good value by various clubs. And from Kane's point of view, I'm still told whether it's 2026 or 2027, he wants to come back and do 2 years in the Premier League because that gives him a chance at least of breaking Alan Shearer's Premier League goal scoring record. 1 season in the Premier League, he's not going to pass it. 2 seasons, it's still a really difficult task, especially at Kane's age, but it's not impossible. And that's there on the radar. And then regarding Manchester United, they wanted him, but Daniel Levy, when he left for Bayern, had 1 deal and 1 price for Bayern and another for Manchester United. So Manchester United inquired. It was astronomical. They never bid. And then when Bayern did the deal, I think Manchester United realised that that's how Daniel Levy works. It's 1 set of terms for a rival. It's another set of terms for a club abroad. And even if Manchester United wanted the Bayern deal and the price and were prepared to match it, Levy would have likely said no to Manchester United and still yes to Bayern. And that's why Manchester United walked away. But now they've added Benjamin Sesko, who's young, and now they have other players that can play in that number 9 position that are in many ways still trying to prove themselves. Joshua Zirzkee will have to kind of wait and see whether he works at Manchester United and whether he has the patience to work and score goals at Manchester United, because obviously he has to think about the World Cup as well and where he's going to get his game time. You've got Chido Obi as well. So if you look at the 9s plus Cunha, you could say there may be room for somebody more experienced now because the average age of those number 9s is relatively young. And that's where Kane might come in and provide not just goals, but be a mentor to other players as well. So I can see a scenario where Manchester United move, and I can see a scenario where Kane does decide to leave Bayern Munich in order to try and break that Harry Kane goal-scoring record. But we don't yet know whether that is going to be definitively summer 2026 after the World Cup, or maybe 12 months further down the line. And then this idea that if Kane leaves Bayern, he's going to go back to Spurs, I'm not so sure. Of course, it's a possibility, but I don't think Kane is averse to another Premier League club that can win him trophies or help him break that record. I'm not so sure, speaking to sources, that it's either a stay at Bayern or a go back to Spurs, even if that is an option. And Thomas Frank has said he'd always be welcome back at the club. I do think that there is a scenario where Kane says he won't go back to Spurs and he will join another Premier League club. And when it was Manchester United and Bayern both inquiring in the early part of the window, long before he actually joined Bayern, Kane, as far as I was told at the time, had no issue joining Manchester United from Spurs. It wasn't a case of if I leave Spurs, I have to leave the Premier League because I never want to wear another shirt. So there could be some encouragement there for Manchester United. But again, we're not talking about any talks or anything advanced at the moment. It's really just watch and see. Is Kane going to leave and invite Premier League clubs to bring him back? And if he does, then we need to keep an eye on Manchester United as potentially one of them.
Ben, you're getting me excited again. I thought you were going to bring me back down to earth, but you're telling me that Harry Kane was open to joining to Manchester United, and you're telling me 2 years
he was
as well. At the time. But that could mean he's open again. I know we're not in the greatest position, and a lot of people are saying, "Well, how do you join Man United?" I think people forget Manchester United is a very prestigious club. You go down in history if you've played for Manchester United. I understand we're not in the best position right now, but I mean, when you speak about him, wanting at least 2 years as well to break the record, I mean, that would be perfect for Benjamin Sesko, who's got all this potential and to have a bit of an experience there leading him as a mentor and someone who's been there, done that in the Premier League. I just think it's perfect. Obviously, we're nowhere near saying, I'm not putting words in your mouth that it's going to happen, but it is something to watch out for.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, at the same time, I know they're looking at younger players as well. Like Etta Ayong is somebody that Manchester United have scouted. Doesn't mean a great deal at this point. He's doing really well at the moment, a 21-year-old playing for Levante, Tottenham and Juventus, also keeping tabs on him too. I think he's got 8 goal contributions in 8 games, which puts him just behind Kylian Mbappe. So it's obvious that they've got this youth-led project. But I think even though Jim Ratcliffe constantly says Chelsea did this, Chelsea model has a lot of substance to it, it's not a carbon copy. And I think the difference between the Man United recruitment approach and the Chelsea one is Chelsea back themselves to rewrite the model, even if it takes them 3 to 5 years, and we're in year 3 now, and take these young players and instead of putting them around the under-21s or the academy, chuck them all into the cusp of the first team, see what sticks and succeeds, and then you suddenly get a rise very publicly. And if they work, you're going to have longevity and they're all going to have been signed at good value. I think Manchester United like elements of that. And I suppose a player like Lenny Yoro is one example. I don't think we can call that too dissimilar in terms of signing to a player at Chelsea like Jorel Hato. But at the other extreme, Manchester United are prepared to and will be prepared to recruit out of urgency with a slightly older or a slightly more proven Premier League player. And that's where instead of your Lenny Yoro or Sene Lamans, you start saying Mbumo and Cunha, and even to an extent Benjamin Sesko, although he's somewhere in the middle, obviously, because he's got a lot of game time, but he is young. So I sense Chelsea would probably look at a Kane opportunity now, and go, we've got João Pedro, we've got Liam Delap. We don't want to go down that route. It's a big wage. It's a big outlay for someone in their mid-30s. I think Manchester United would say, if you get 2 years out of a Kane that is intent on breaking Shearer's Premier League record, and to do that, he'd need 30 goals and 30 goals in each season, snap your hand off, even if after those 2 years he leaves the football club. And that's probably the point of difference, that Man United will make more band-aid or more short-term signings that they feel are reliable to drop into the first team with immediate improvement. Whereas I think Chelsea's model is maybe to look at where's the long-term return. And that's where maybe Ratcliffe will deviate a little bit from how Clearlake Bowley are operating.
Yeah, that's some really good insight there, because you do see Sir Jim Ratcliffe, come out and speak about the Chelsea model, and you can kind of see how we're adapting that model of going for that younger option, like we did with Benjamin Sesko when it was between Ollie Watkins, Benjamin Sesko, and we're looking at them 2 options. However, to know that they would be open to a deal like that, I think is a good thing, because sometimes you need deals like that. You need some experience, you need leadership, you need proven players, especially at Manchester United, where you're trying to get back up to that top level, which we're not at yet. So exciting stuff. I mean, speaking about the current players, a lot of people are asking me to ask you about potential midfielders in January. So I will do that. Ben, are Manchester United open to signing midfielders in January? What kind of midfielders? Would it be a loan? Would it be like a market opportunity? And then alongside that, Kobbie Mainoo, currently, not started in the Premier League. Would he push for a loan or even a permanent move again? And would they go hand in hand with each other? Would bringing a midfielder in mean we have to move the likes of a Kobbie Mainoo on? Do you have anything to say on that side of things for Manchester United?
I think it'd be the other way around, in the sense that if Kobbie Mainoo goes back to Manchester United, which of course is a possibility, and says he wants to leave in some capacity to get game time ahead of the World Cup, then that wouldn't be sanctioned unless Manchester United could bring in a midfielder first. And Mainoo's position is unclear, in the sense that in the summer it was a don't want to be sold, but I want to be loaned so I can go and get game time. If he repeats that position, then Manchester United wouldn't sanction that loan either at all, or only if they brought in a midfielder. If Kobbie Mainoo changes his position and says, now I want to be sold, then maybe Manchester United can make that sale, that pure profit, and then suddenly escalate some business from the summer a little bit earlier and try their luck with one or two targets. But a lot of the midfielders that Manchester United like are not going to be available in January. So I'm still told there'll be no panic buy. There's no guarantee yet that a midfielder arrives in January, because Manchester United want to put their budget towards the names that they really think could be revamps in the centre of the park with long-term gain. And if you spend some of your summer money in January for the sake of it, and it's not the right name, then have you still got the budget, especially if they were not to get Champions League football, to then go and bring in the midfielders that you really wanted in the summer? So I think there'll be more of like a patient approach, because the targets are the same. You know, Carlos Baleba, big outlay. Let's see whether Brighton want to sell. Angelo Stiller, possibly Elliot Anderson, very likely Adam Wharton on the list. But again, it depends on whether he signs a new Palace deal first.
Well, I was going to say on that, Bennett, do you think we'll still be interested in Baleba? I know, obviously, when you do scouting and you do research into recruitment, you shouldn't just flip so quickly. But, you know, there is question marks about whether he would be able to do it at Manchester United when, obviously, not obviously, but it's been, his mentality has been questioned a little bit because of the start to the season he's had. He's not nowhere near at the level he was, and you know he can be. And the manager Herschler is hinted that could be because he didn't get his Manchester United move. I mean, I think some fans are thinking, well, if not getting a move in the summer is going to affect you, I mean, how is criticism online of when you know you're playing for one of the biggest clubs in the world going to affect you? Are Manchester United still all in on Baleba if they can do that?
Yeah, I think they are aware the start to the season doesn't reflect the player that they were prepared to put big money behind if Brighton were open to a move. But we're so early in the season, it's really difficult to be judging players. From Baleba's point of view, I think he's only played 7 games in the kind of Premier League, but not all of them have been starts. And therefore, we probably need to get to January before we really start judging Carlos Baleba and kind of standard he's at. Now, naturally, some will say Evan Ferguson was a £100 million player and very quickly was not getting opportunities even at Brighton and was having to be loaned out and hasn't really recovered, although he started very optimistically and positively in Italy with Roma. So the fear maybe will be that there is just a decline. But I think the reality is that it's not just Manchester United. Most within the industry, all across Europe, and certainly within big 6 teams in the Premier League, know that this is a player, know that this is somebody that could be 100+ million, and he's only 21 years of age. So I don't think Manchester United are backing out of Baleba. I think, again, it just comes down to the fact that the true reality of his price and what it takes to prize him out of Brighton will not be apparent until probably April, May, or even when the window actually opens next summer. And because Brighton are not giving any numbers, they're not giving any encouragement, it's really difficult to do anything other than tell the player you're interested and keep in touch and wait for that price to become apparent, which of course will be informed by what kind of season he also has this campaign. And they'll get to a certain point, almost ironically, where if he doesn't do that well, the price may drop. And then Manchester United might say, he's good value. Alternatively, he might do so well that the price may rise so high that Manchester United may say we're forced to choose now between buying one Baleba or 2 other midfielders for 60 million and 60 million. And that's when you start saying, would we rather trigger Angelo Stiller's release clause and bid for an Adam Wharton or an Elliot Anderson and get both, or just buy one Carlos Baleba and have to overpay because Brighton normally get the money they're looking for and then find there isn't any budget to bring in a second midfielder. So these kind of considerations will be happening internally, but not now, not in January, which is why I think the whole midfield picture won't be clear until the summer. And regarding other names, it's not impossible that Manchester United look for a more opportunistic midfielder in the January market, but I don't have any names at this stage to suggest that they're advanced with somebody that might come mid-season.
Thank you for that. I mean, also Malik has asked a question. He said, what about Kobbie and Zirzkee? Well, we spoke a little bit about Kobbie Mainoo, but on Zirzkee, Ben, I mean, there's some reports coming out that he's prepared to ask Manchester United to leave in January. He's worried about his game time. He's not getting that much game time currently, and that's what happens when you're playing one game a week. It's so frustrating because I think a lot of fans want to see him play more, but you can only play 11, and we are only playing one game a week. Do you think Zirzkee will push for that move, and do you think Manchester United would allow him to go as well?
Yeah, I think Joshua Zirzkee is getting a bit worried because he was excluded from the Netherlands squad, and as a consequence, with the World Cup being basically 9 months away, there's a fear that he might not make that squad. And maybe it's the same as Kobbie Mainoo, that he has to leave on loan and Manchester United just say no. But I think there is a realistic chance in January that Josh Zirzkee says, I need to go somewhere, and Manchester United will then have a really big decision to be made. If Chido Obi ends up being part of the first team squad, Mateus Cunha can lead the line and Benjamin Sesko's there, it's not unthinkable that Zirzkee might be loaned somewhere. I doubt it'll be a permanent sale because they're not going to improve upon the 43 million that they paid, and therefore it becomes a book loss, and Manchester United will want to avoid that. So I think the Manchester United perspective on Zirzkee is what's unclear, and we'll have to wait and see whether they are more forthcoming with him than they were with Kobbie Mainoo over the summer. But I think the Zirzkee side is actually becoming quite clear that he does want to leave. He does at least want to explore options because he's played 82 minutes total in all competitions. And if that continues, it's highly likely he's not going to make the Netherlands World Cup squad. But the difference between Mainoo and Zirzkee, which might make it harder for Zirzkee to persuade Manchester United, and Mainoo failed, which means that for Zirzkee, how much chance does he actually have? Is that with Kobbie Mainoo, you have a player that wanted to go out on loan, and you had a manager that doesn't really think he's quite right yet for the system, and they still made him stay because they didn't bring in another midfielder. With Josh Zirzkee, you got a player that actually now is thinking about leaving, but you got a manager that really likes him as a squad player, because they know that even if he's not scoring every week, he's very effective across all of the front line. And not only that, but he has defensive qualities as well. So having Josh Zirzkee as an impact player is seen as very beneficial to Ruben Amorim, but that's not the role that Zirzkee wants to play. So unlike Kobbie Mainoo, who's not getting game time because there's other midfielders that Amorim thinks are right for the system, Zirzkee is somebody that Amorim really values as a squad player, as a depth player, as an alternative. But for Zirzkee, those minutes are just not enough. So I do think that there's a concrete possibility that he will explore options in January. PSV is the one that I've heard on a loan. That could be one to keep an eye on. Napoli won't be back because they signed Rasmus Højlund, and there may even be some interest from the Premier League as well if Manchester United agree to loan Zirzkee.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because all you hear out is that Ruben Amorim really likes Joshua Zirzkee. Manchester United's coaching team really like Joshua Zirzkee, but he's barely seen any minutes, and I think that can be frustrating to a player. If I'm looking at Zirzkee and I'm thinking, of course the World Cup is so important to a lot of players, and I understand that, and it's so hard to ask a player to put a season of their career basically on hold. But if Manchester United were in Europe, he'd have a lot more game time. It's
exactly.
Like, it's whether Amorim can say, look, like, let's get into Europe next season. This is your role. This is what you're going to do. But it's hard to do that to a player across a whole season when you going out the Carabao Cup as well. That's difficult. Lastly, Ben, it's absolutely flown by as it always does. BMD, you know, we chatting away, but it's all good stuff. So thank you so much for staying with us. But the last thing I wanted to ask you was about Harry Maguire. So talked about a new contract potentially for him, but then there's reports saying he'd have to take a significant wage cut if he was going to sign a new deal. I mean, there's reports that Saudi clubs actually were looking at him, and there was also reports that he just might not even be offered a new deal. Where is Harry Maguire at? Do you think a new deal will be offered? Does he want to sign?
Well, I think Manchester United still value Harry Maguire because of what he adds off the field as well. So it's not unthinkable that he gets an extension. And remember, an extension doesn't mean he's staying. An extension, like with Ilkay Gundogan at Manchester City, can also just be about protecting the value. So sometimes an extra year is agreed, but then the summer is still left open. And I think that's why we don't have ultimate clarity yet, because new deal doesn't automatically mean staying. new deal can just mean protecting the value. But if Harry Maguire wants to stay at Manchester United, and as you allude to, is prepared to take reduced terms, then I think Manchester United will be comfortable with that. And it reminds me a bit of the David De Gea situation, which was often spoken about as the same. If he agrees to reduce terms, he can stay. And it ended up bleeding into even the period after the contract expired, and there was no clarity. So I think Manchester United's perspective is not to fall into that trap, and to make sure they get absolute clarity with Harry Maguire sooner rather than later. So we're not talking about this all season. Maguire hasn't really been thinking about beyond the summer. It was more, was it right to stay at Manchester United this season in a World Cup year? And he and Manchester United decided yes. Again, is why clarity will be needed early to make sure this isn't an April, May, end of season. Is he staying? Is he going? World Cup. That's kind of a lot for all parties to take in and deal with. So I think we'll get clarity sooner rather than later. But once again, a one-year extension in December doesn't actually mean that he's definitely going to see that season out. It just protects the value for Manchester United. Regarding Saudi, I'm not so sure. We heard links with two clubs. And again, I'm not here to shout down others reporting. I respect other journalists. But my understanding within Saudi is that the Al Nassr links are nothing more than the fact at the moment that Cristiano Ronaldo knows Maguire, and that Al Nassr do desperately want to add a foreign centre-back in summer 2026. So we'll have to see if that develops. All the other centre-backs that they've looked at in previous windows have been much younger than Harry Maguire. But now Cristiano Ronaldo is heavily involved in the recruitment. The other club name was Al Ittifaq, and I can tell you categorically there's no substance to that whatsoever. They don't have the budget, they don't have the infrastructure. That was, of course, the club that Steven Gerrard managed and Jordan Henderson moved to. Al Ittifaq are not in for Harry Maguire. They cannot afford Harry Maguire. They've made no contact with Harry Maguire. So we can rule them out. And I think generally Maguire has never given Saudi any encouragement. He's had approaches and informal offers since summer 2023. And for me, my personal opinion, even after the World Cup, is it would be a surprise if Harry Maguire's next destination was Saudi Arabia. If anything, I think he's more inclined to stay within England or even move to an MLS club if he was to leave Manchester United. And for example, you've got Dean Smith at Charlotte, who's made a call before to inquire again on the wage, which would have to come down. And the overall expectations of Maguire didn't lead to anything. But there are MLS clubs that are also alert to Maguire's situation if he chooses to leave Manchester United.
Look, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've got so much clarification on topics that we were unsure of before we did the show with you. I think the big one was obviously the news about potential new investment, and you know, some people might have wanted to hear more positive news on that, but you gave us the reality, and that is currently that there's nothing there as of now, and so much more as well. So thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. And you know, so much news in an international break. Manchester United, that's what we do, isn't it?
Exactly. Always great fun. Speak to you next week.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you everybody else for watching as well. Do remember, on That's Football tonight, you have England versus Wales, 7:45 kickoff, Goldbridge watch along. Make sure you're there. And we're also joined for another interview tomorrow with Rob Dawson from the ESPN. So make sure you stay tuned. 2 p.m. tomorrow on the United Stand, and obviously all new shows still going ahead, 10 to 8. We are here. But thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you on the next one.